Cool. All right, I think we can get started. I don't think I'll take the whole time, so there'll be lots of time for Q&A. But there's a fair bit amount of things to cover. Welcome. I'm going to be Oscar Morita talking about publishing alchemy with Markdown and Pandoc. Just a show of hands, anyone play with Pandoc, use Pandoc or Markdown? Know what it is? Okay, cool. So we go through it pretty quick. How about, has anyone heard of Pandoc? Oh, cool. Yes, I discovered this over the last year. It's pretty cool. So why did I call this talk alchemy for a little side trick? Profound powers. We're going to have profound powers at the end of this. So what are our tools? It's a plain text format for writing, and coupled with Pandoc, which is a command line tool for converting one markup to another, mainly Markdown, but it can take in a couple different inputs like HTML. Really suitable for. I know I've seen it on projects where I get a Markdown file of, like, here's the database login credentials, technical documentation, the modules installed, which you can turn into a nice PDF to hand off to the client. I've used it to write articles for blogs. It's much easier to write in Markdown, I've found. You could publish a book. LeanPub uses Markdown and a lot of other publishers to write the manuscript for a book and then turn it into what you sell. And if you're particularly, it's actually not that difficult. You can create slides for presentations. So I wrote this presentation in Pandoc in Markdown and used Pandoc to transform it into slides. Or HTML. The original release was a Perl library, and then Aaron Swartz contributed some additions and fixes to that. And it kind of slowly took off from there. What are some of the, and let me know if I'm going too fast or if you have questions, just jump in. Some of the advantages of Markdown, like I said before, it's plain text. You don't have a bunch of WYSIWYG controls that are going to get in your way and distract you from writing. So it's easier to focus on just producing writing, then coming back and editing it. Since it's plain text, it's very portable. Files are easy to version, so if you can keep track of changes with Git or Subversion, whatever tool you want to use. When you look at a Markdown document, it's a lot more readable than raw HTML. HTML with all the tags in the way makes it really verbose, and it's really hard to focus on, what's the sentence trying to say, and mentally ignore the tags. Since it's plain text, you can use any text editor or even your IDE if you want. In the end, I ended up writing this with PHP Storm. Most IDEs, most text editors have Markdown support or a plugin that you could add to preview it. There's a ton of standalone editors if you want to look for good ones. Markdown Pad for Windows is almost the only one I could find. There was another one that didn't seem quite as developed. On Macs, which I apparently forgot to write a word in there. MOU and IA Writer are popular. I work on Linux desktops a lot, and Retext is really good for editing Markdown there and giving you a nice preview. There's also online Markdown editors like Dillinger.io, where you just edit everything in the browser and have it render the output. There's also Markdown editors for iOS, Android, etc. I use one called Elements, so I can hook it up with Dropbox, and I could, in theory, make changes on my iPad and then have that on my other machine synced up pretty easily. Unfortunately, there's not a clearly defined Markdown spec, right? There's not a standard that says this is what Markdown is. There are different flavors of it. beyond the original Markdown, basic Markdown. GitHub has its own flavor that adds some things like URL auto-linking, strike-throughs, to-do lists. There's also multi-Markdown, which adds footnotes, tables, citations, and captions for images. And a lot of these overlap, so it's a crazy Venn diagram of which one could you choose. Markdown Extra adds stuff, also supports footnotes, fenced code blocks, which we'll see in tables. And pandoc has its own extensions to Markdown to do table, actually like 4 or 5 different ways of doing tables. If you have a fenced code block, you can also produce syntax highlighted code, and it does inline footnotes. And those are just some of the extensions that there are a lot more. You can also use Markdown in a lot of different environments. So if you're on a WordPress site, you can use WP Markdown to edit your blog posts in the admin UI in Markdown, and then on the output end, it'll put out HTML. Drupal has a Markdown filter project created called Markdown. If you have a home-built tool, or you have already an editor and you want to add Markdown support to it, there's a PHP Markdown Extra, a PHP class and library that you could pull in and then do the processing yourself as you needed to. Stack Edit is a service. Let's take a look at it real quick and see if this is going to work, which is kind of neat. Oh, yeah, that's the GitHub. You could host this yourself and provide kind of a cloudy but private editor for Markdown documents. And your users can then create new documents, see them rendered as Markdown, and share them. Where'd my window go? Of course, we won't be doing that again. If you want to plug in a WYSIWYG editor, or not a WYSIWYG, but a more visual editor to a text area, there's a JavaScript editor called Epic Editor that lets you do that. It's kind of similar to the one on Stack Overflow, if you've seen. It gives you the preview and that sort of stuff. Any questions so far? I'm going to run through in the next couple slides what Markdown syntax looks like. Headings are 1 or more hashes. Denotes a deeper level of headings, and headings are commonly used, especially with pandoc, to structure your document. So they're semantically important. So you see how, like, as you add more hashes, it gets that's how you denote them, and they would get the appropriate H1 tags. The bulk of your text, are like paragraphs, or just separated by new lines. You can word wrap them or not, and pandoc will handle it. You can also do block quotes by beginning stuff with a greater than sign. So here's up here in the shaded areas this example of raw Markdown, where I have like a short paragraph and a block quote. In the bottom is how it would render in. Look. So there's a nice separation of concerns there. Inline text, you can format it with italics, bold, and monospace. Italics gets a single asterisk or a single. Bold, you do both. So this is part of where, like, there's different flavors of Markdown comes into play. Some people prefer asterisks for bold, but then you have to do 2 in italics with underscores, so it gets a little ordered lists. Where they're sequentially numbered, you just have to start it with a number and a period. You don't even have to keep track of the numbering yourself. You can see in this example that the main list all just starts with one period. And the sublist isn't even in sequential order. I have one period. But then when the markdown editor parser runs, it fixes that for you, which makes it easy. As an extension, so if you want to do, because you could also do letters and Roman numerals and stuff if you use their add-on to the markdown. I'm not sure. I only saw it in the pandoc documentation. If you're writing stuff that's turned into a web page or just linked to a URL somewhere, you can do links in a couple different ways. A typical link is enclosed with square brackets, and the text you want to make so in this case, the my blog part in the example is encased in the square brackets. And then if you do that, the URLs are in parentheses. The URL that you want to link to is in parentheses. And if you're doing a local document, relative paths. So you could have an ebook, for example, and link to different places within your ebook using local paths. Alternatively, if you want to show a URL and make it linkable, you can just put it in angled brackets, and it renders like a link with the URL as the text that's clickable.
Question: is that actually your blog?
Yes, that is my blog. Yes. You can also do images. It's the same format as URLs, where you put the caption in square brackets and the path to the image in parentheses. And in this case, I have a relative image, but this could be a URL to an image somewhere else. The only difference is start with an exclamation point. And there will be the embedded text. It'll be the alt text or the caption, depending on how your template renders it. Yep. So this is old school. I had a hard time. It's kind of like calling a function, and your path is in parentheses like a function parameter is. Yes.
Is there a URL you can go to get a good cheat sheet?
Actually, the Wikipedia page for Markdown is a decent cheat sheet.
There in Fireball's got a pretty.
Yeah, the original post has it all.
Although it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, the Wikipedia one had more, because that one assumes there's no other Markdown flavors.
Right.
Of course, if you do more managery type stuff or data stuff, you'd have to deal with tables. And there's a couple different ways to do tables. Some get easier or harder to write, depending on how complicated you want to be. And they kind of vary by implementation. As you saw, each one of them has tables, but there are grid tables, simple tables, and the rest. This is an example of a simple table where your columns, did not mean to click touchpad. Your columns kind of line up. This first row becomes your table headings. You separate the columns with minus signs or dashes. And depending on how the text, cannot do that. How the text heading lines up relative to your dashes, it affects how the cells will align. So you can do some simple left, center, and right justified alignment. This isn't too bad to write, and it's okay for like a data table where you have one item. You don't need to have a lot of text in each table cell, and then it just renders as a simple bunch of TRs and TDs, which you can affect the output with CSS. So in this case, I had to create a class and make the headings red, and put some padding and stuff so they're not all jammed together. If you need to do more complicated tables, there's one that's useful are grid tables, which requires a little more patience to draw. But you don't have to. You can, depending on how I don't want to say OCD, but attentive to detail you are, or bugged by stuff not lining up, you can sink a lot of time into making sure the pipes line up. They don't have to, because it's not looking for the amount of white space to verify that the grid lines actually flow. It's just looking for them to denote containers, essentially.
Can you combine like the markup, the markdown syntax with the HTML?
Yes, you can.
In this case, it would be easier to do it in HTML.
You can embed raw HTML in Markdown whenever you want. The only problem might be later if you're using pandoc to convert it, whether it would convert the HTML depending on what your target is to something the target understands. So if like you're going from Markdown to a PDF, I'm not certain that an HTML table render. It might. I haven't played with it, but there might be where it doesn't. I can't think of too many, but there might be some. Or if you do some complicated like divs, raw divs, and Markdown. So in this case, you see there's just a lot more symbols. You use dashes.
I've always just used back.
I don't think so.
So that will render the
Yeah.
block as a block.
Yeah.
But I wonder if I can do the syntax or how that works with pandoc. Never used pandoc.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Pandoc's pretty forgiving, so it might support both. This is kind of what I mainly use. So.
Does the markdown filter in Drupal also highlight?
I'm not sure. I don't think it does.
It doesn't.
No.
Extra layer on top.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do it on your HTML.
Right. You could do it with like a JavaScript or something. I looked at Markdown. When I looked at it, it didn't seem to like it. But the last update was 2013 or so. So, not that Markdown has changed too, but it's basically a new text filter. So let's combine all these things we've looked at. Well, most of these things into a simple Markdown example. Here's an image, a couple of text blocks about the World Cup, and then a table of state. You can see how this really, you can glance over this, get a sense of what it's really easy to read. And or parse. Even table looks, it's all good. So when it renders in HTML, where's the CSS? That was supposed to be floated right. So we get an image. You can see how our caption is displayed as in the caption tag there, although I didn't style it differently. And our text and our table. If we scroll, there, and our link at the end. You don't. As long as is the original content, then you could look at make it available as a. You can compile the markdown.
User select which format the user wants to get it in. Pretty good time. And in Haskell, with Haskell, it converts. It takes Markdown, HTML, which I mistyped there, and a couple others, and then you can output it back to Markdown HTML is a pretty common one too. Here's a link for the instructions for installing pandoc. It can run anywhere Haskell does, so Windows, Mac OS X, or BSD. I haven't installed it with that. Linux mode made in their repos, or you can use Haskell has its own package manager called Cabal, I think, and that's the best way to get the latest version of pandoc. It's updated pretty frequently. The last update in May, I believe, and before that it was in March. So it's actively developed. Actually, I should have put his name in here. The developer is really responsive. I've had to file a couple tickets for him. Like one was asking for better PHP code syntax highlighting, because right now the version he's released, you have to have the open PHP bracket for it to detect it, which is kind of annoying. And there was one little bug with the EPUB output. It didn't validate, but he fixed that nicely.
Is it in Homebrew?
I don't know. I don't use my Mac that much, actually. Just when I present. And as mentioned before, pandoc has some extensions to Markdown. The point of the extensions, like we mentioned before, pandoc and Markdown allow embedding of raw HTML. Pandoc discourages it because it wants to provide other non-HTML ways to represent the data so that it can more easily transform it to the target output without having to parse HTML. Some of the extensions been mentioned before, fancier lists, so you can control whether you have upper and lowercase letters for your list or Roman numerals. It adds support for doing definition lists. Inline footnotes if you're doing something that's like scholarly or you want to cite stuff. And the built-in syntax highlighting, which we've looked at. You can read the pandoc documentation for details. It's really complete, a lot of examples.
Stack Overflow, there's a pretty lively community there too. So I've gotten stuck on one or two things like, how do I do this? Change the margins on my PDF, and there's a question in pandoc to do. Dive right into pandoc. Since most of the time, or one pretty common use case is to structure a large document. You could do a report, or your technical documentation for a project, or maybe you're writing a book for like LeanPub or to publish with us. Talk to me later. How would you structure it? And what if you have multiple contributors? It's easier to break up a large document into multiple files, so you wouldn't have one huge markdown document that everyone's working on. Typically, break it up, one chapter per file, and then use a naming convention so that listing the files by the OS will put them in sequence. So you use numbers like to put stuff that should be at the front of the book, 001 dash whatever your introduction. Each chapter can be chapter dash 01 or 001 if we can have a ton of chapters. Then when you do an LS or a glob, they should come through sorted the way you intend. Because pandoc can take more than one file and produce a single document output. That's how we publish our books. That's where that advice comes from. You can put figures and images in a subfolder called images or figures or whatever you want, and then use relative links to link to them. And then use Git, Subversion, whichever you prefer or you're stuck with, depending on your point of view, to commit your changes, get changes from your collaborators, that sort of thing. And then since pandoc is a command line tool, it's real easy to build a small script or use some automation tool to then build your full document or documents all at once with one command. So, besides HTML, one common use for pandoc that is nice is outputting a PDF. It requires, in addition to having pandoc installed, that you have is it latex or latex? Latex. I like the Spanish pronunciation. The latex engine, and depending on what your operating system is, there's a couple of different ones you can use. If you structure your document the way I suggested, different chapters in separate files. Use heading 1 to start a new chapter, heading 2 for subtitles and stuff. You can real easily add a table of contents using these command line switches, --toc, and you can control how deep in the headings it goes. So if you only want to go 2 levels deep, you can do --toc -depth and level. Since pandoc uses latex to render PDFs, you can pass it /page break to introduce page breaks manually in your PDF. And if you really dive into latex, you can do some more advanced stuff like multiple columns, and I think it uses mathematic equations and all sorts of fun stuff.
Does it do PDF headings, bookmarks? When you say table of contents, does it add a front matter or on the side?
Oh, I haven't looked at it. It adds a front matter, but I think it. No, I don't think I've seen it on the side. At least the way I've used it, it probably can, because under the hood, there's templates that you can customize for how your latex output comes or how your HTML. So if you want to wrap some standard stuff, or what kind of markup or commands you need to add to that template, you should be able to do that.
So if I have, my book has 5 chapters. I have file 1 through 5, and then I have 3 subheadings in it. It'll actually, if I leave my depth off, it'll actually put 1 through 5.
Yeah. Yes.
And how does it understand, you talked about the file name, but how does it understand the relationship of the
Internally it adds, to the headings, you mean? Internally it adds, when it's parsing the document, it adds some identifiers to your headings so it can link between them all. And build a table.
File 1 is chapter 1.
So
It doesn't. It's just the order that you feed them in. That's why I said give them an order that sorts in the sequence you want to give to them. The other way you could do that, instead of doing that, you could give it a text file and list the files that you want in the exact order, and then feed that text file as your input.
It seems an easier way to use online documentation than
Yeah.
doc books.
Right. And I think it has DocBook support too. So let's take a look. Hopefully this won't mess up too much. Here's this presentation. I just had to write markdown one time, and I'll put it as a PDF. I'll upload these to the presentation description on Capital Camp. So you can see, I mean, it's not very legible, but it's a PDF. Here are my headings. Each slide is and then these are the 2 pages. So there's all our slides, and then the images are embedded nicely. So all the stuff we've seen. You see the tables render a little differently because it's not an HTML table in this case. It might be hard to tell on the projector, but that syntax block is highlighted in the PDF. And even our image comes through semi-respectably. And if you want to dive into the details of how you can learn about LaTeX. So that's any questions so far? Whoops, that's tomorrow's presentation. So that's PDF, another nice format. EPUB, if you want someone to read this on their Kindle or iBooks. EPUB is a free and open ebook standard. It uses under the hood HTML, CSS, a subset of CSS. The first thing you need, in addition to your raw markdown source, is an XML file that holds some standard EPUB metadata, and it uses Dublin Core. These are just the minimal I think you need. So it's got the title, the language. Here's my name is the author, the date, and I never got the date right for this, and a copyright. Other work, this to a book.
Can you control the CSS in your EPUB?
Yes, there's a EPUB CSS switch you can add and have it. Not actually.
For the XML file, do you need any other specifications in front of the first line?
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not quite a valid XML document. You don't have to have a root node, it turns out. Or maybe you do. In mine, it didn't yell at me when I did it this way. This was I got this off of the pandoc documentation and just replaced their values. The command at the command line, so we have you can control the table of contents the same way. -O tells it what output file we want. So in this case, we're going to create. For that reason. So and here, let me move that so you guys can see it. You can see my wonderful design skills. That's my little book cover. Title, I found a nice little chemical-y clip art. And this is the book. So then this is something I could read on my iPad in iBooks. Oh, I'm at the bottom, yeah. This is a confusing thing. I haven't sorted out why it puts the cover at the very end. But here's the first page. There's our table of contents, and you can link deeper into the book. You can see the format's a little different, but it's under the hood. It's all CSS. But we've got it does not like scrolling. You know, tables come through, and it's got the same styling as the presentation, images, get the caption, and all that sort of good stuff. Let's look at. Here's a table of contents on the side. So if it does this for EPUBs, it probably does something similar for PDFs. But so here's all our headings become these links, so people can navigate the book pretty easily. Well, towards the end, further reading, a couple of links if you're interested in diving deeper into this. Puppet Labs has a good article how they automated their ebook builds. I Googled for how to convert Word to Markdown because I know a lot of organizations still use Word to link to a Stack Overflow question. A couple of different scripts. One of them was a Mac thing that will probably get you 75 to 80% of the way there, and then you'd have to clean up some things. Someone open sourced a Markdown EPUB builder, so you could just kind of take their workflow and use that to build EPUBs. If you want to convert an EPUB to Mobi, which is Amazon's Kindle standard, Amazon has Kindle Gen, which will do that for you. S5 is the HTML-based slideshow system that I used for this, and some more reading about pandoc and latex at that link there.